I was born biologically female. I began transitioning and taking hormones when I was 18 years old. Growing up, I couldn't pinpoint what my issues were, and then I realized that it might be a gender issue. When I turned 18, I did go to Planned Parenthood. I just stated that I had gender dysphoria, and they gave me testosterone a week later. Before I went on hormone therapy, I wasn't required to see any therapist or any sort of a doctor at all. So about a year and a half after I was on hormones, I decided to see a therapist about getting approval for top surgery. I walked in on one appointment for half an hour, and then she emailed my insurance for approval, just like that. Even at this point, when I was passing as a man, I still had these doubts in the back of my mind that said, what if you're wrong? What if you made a mistake? In the end, I decided not to do the surgery. At that point that I decided to detransition and live my life as a woman again. Even as an adult, it took me a long time to figure out who I was and who I wanted to be. Kids especially need to see a therapist before making any sort of permanent medical decisions like going on hormone blockers and surgeries especially. I mean, they don't even know what they want for dinner the next day, let alone what gender they are. The biggest mistake that I made was that I did not get the right amount of therapy or medical advice needed. These days, if you tell a parent if their child thinks that they might be transgender or has gender dysphoria, to wait and really consider it and maybe seek other therapy, you're just seen as transphobic now because you're not accepting people. I'm not anti-trans at all. I support the trans community very much, but I also support medical responsibility.
If you question this at all, you get labeled really quickly, correct?
You do, immediately as transphobic.
Why do you think that is?
I think that a lot of the transgender community, they push so much for acceptance that when you immediately, or anytime you start to question them, even if it's out of the goodness of your heart to try and make sure that they're making the right decision, anything that goes against their narrative is just immediately labeled as transphobic.
Now, after you started to transition, how else did you begin to change your life to live as a man?
I had changed my name. I started wearing a binder. I even moved cities because at the time I was very hesitant to actually come out to coworkers. So I moved about 4 hours away, got a completely different job, and introduced myself as a trans man.
Okay. And what happened when you began to schedule time to get a double mastectomy?
I haven't had any top surgeries, but I did get approved for it.
Okay, that's what it is. You got approved for it.
I did. I got approved. And how that worked, it was scarily easy to do because I had just called a therapist and I had scheduled one appointment, for a 30-minute session to talk about it. And I essentially walked in. I said, I identify as transgender and I want to get top surgery. And we chatted for a bit, maybe for half an hour. And at the end of the session, she wrote me an approval letter to send to my insurance. And then I got approved just like that.
When you first started, you went in, you said to Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
And they gave you testosterone immediately.
Yeah, I essentially just made a phone call and said, I want to transition. And it was immediately given. I got a prescription and went to pick it up a week later.
Did they ask you questions? Did they do any psychological testing? Did they ask you why? What was your motive?
It was completely self-diagnosed. Well, self-diagnosed. I claimed that I had gender dysphoria and I wanted to transition, and they didn't really ask me any questions about it. I just called them and I said, when can I get this? And they just said they needed to write me a prescription for it and send it, and that's essentially
what happened. You had no
happened.
proof that you were gender dysphoric.
You
didn't.
Yeah, I didn't talk to anyone about it. Nobody medically professionally. I had just looked up. I did some trans research, I guess, into the transgender community and everybody online, and they just seemed so happy and successful. And at the time, I didn't see any information on detransition or any the negatives about it. And so I kind of got completely wrapped into that.
Gender dysphoria can be a miserable way to live if that's what they're experiencing. And there are criteria for that. And one of the criteria is time, that is persistent across time. But you didn't have any of those criteria. You didn't demonstrate that. You didn't document that. You didn't have any professional that documented that.
Nope.
You just said, I want testosterone. They gave it to you.
Yeah, I had confused, because I had become uncomfortable with how society had seen me as a woman sexually. And I had confused that, being uncomfortable with my gender, as gender dysphoria, and being uncomfortable with my body. So I didn't actually have gender dysphoria. I had just confused myself into thinking that I did.
Do you have a story or a question for me? Click the link in the description and tell me what in the world is going on.